May the Noble Triple Gem bless you all. So we meet once again. After our last discussion, we had a nice session about the rash, if you can recall. So we are going to apply those principles in our day-to-day life, and in our today's discussion we will be discussing moreover about the same principles in order to help you to find your happiness within your lives. So without a further ado, let us start our talk today. But before starting that, we pay our homage to the Perfect One by chanting the Namaskara 3 times. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, dear children, I hope you are leading a very happy life, because by practicing the teachings that we discuss in these talks, by inculcating those ideas into your day-to-day life, I believe now you are starting to feel some difference in your lives. So, dear children, in our last talk, if you can remember, we talked about something very salient in our life. We are going after pleasures. We are seeking pleasure to feel fulfilled. But dear children, let us think for a moment whether have we actually got fulfilled. Because, my dear children, without the purpose being fulfilled, there's no use of something to try continuously. For example, let us take something that you do to fulfill yourself. For example, let's say that you are a movie fan and you are watching movies to get fulfilled. Let's imagine that you got to know from a friend that a new movie is released, and that is your favorite movie, and it's a new release. So now you can't think when I'm going to watch it. So you're counting days till the day that you get to watch it. My dear children, have you stopped for a minute and think about why do you watch it? Of course, dear children, you watch to get fulfilled. The last time that you watched the new release of the same movie, so you thought to yourself, I'm going to get fulfilled after watching this. And you watched it and you enjoyed a very big amount of pleasure. Of course you did. And did you get fulfilled? That is the salient question that we all have to ask from ourselves, dear children. It is inevitable that we experience pleasure when you watch a movie. If you like that movie, of course you will experience the pleasure. But did you stop and think, why do you get the urge to watch such movies? Right? Because when we get urges, the natural inclination, the natural tendency of the mind is to seek that pleasure. Did you ever think, why do these urges come to your mind, dear children? So if you go and stop and thought for yourself, you might find an answer. Actually, you might actually start to think in a different line of thought. So that is what we are targeted. That is what we target to achieve, my dear children. So all of these things that you perceive each and every day, they are they are dependent on causes. They are not fixed entities. All of the things that you come across in your day-to-day life, they have causes. So if you identify the correct causes for something to manifest, you will understand the methodology, the etiology, or the causes for them. Dear children, so when you get these urges, I want to watch the next release of this movie, or else I feel like I'd have an ice cream today, I should have a walk, or I should call my friend. When you get these urges, we have to think about why we get those urges. It's very important that we reflect on these thoughts, because then only we get a good understanding about how the mind works. And we are not supposed to be the servant of the mind, because we have a powerful mind where we can come out of being a servant. So dear children, when you get these urges, so the fact that you cannot control it itself proves that we are being servant to the mind. Dear children, if you try your best, can you stop those urges? I don't want you to do this, because, my dear children, if you try to stop those urges by force, you will suffer. That is very traumatic. That is why I don't ask you to do that. That is not the Buddhist way. There is a path to suffering, and Buddhist way is not either to achieve fulfillment through giving what the mind needs. That is also not the Buddhist way. Then you might ask me, then what is the Buddhist way? That is something totally different to all those paths. None of them is the Buddhist way. If you can understand, if you can think of the correct cause for the rising of these urges, then you will see one salient feature of how mind works and how these urges arise. My dear children, those urges will cause you a lot of vexation in your mind. When the vexation is built up in the mind, now you can't help yourself. If the vexation is very high, now the mind cannot help itself. The vexation will be relieved. And of course, due to that reason, because the vexation is relieved, you will feel a lot of pleasure as well. Unfortunately, the pleasure that you feel is misinterpreted in the mind because of the ignorance. Actually, my dear children, the misinterpretation of this pleasure itself is the ignorance. That is why my purpose of these talks, my dear children, is to teach you about what ignorance is. Because ignorance is the ignorance on ignorance. So if you can come out of the ignorance, that means you know what ignorance is for sure. In that way, you interpret the pleasure in the correct way, without misinterpreting. Dear children, the pleasure that you feel is not pleasurable itself. What you feel as pleasure is vexation that you come out of. So dear children, hereby I present you to a technique, the technique of correct interpretation of pleasure. When you experience some amount of pleasure, you can always try this. Because now we know that pleasure is release of vexation. Now you can think of the pleasure that you experience and how much of vexation should it have been in the first place. For example, when you watch the new release of this movie, of course you feel a huge gush of pleasure. When you experience this, you can think like this: if this is this pleasurable, how vexatious has it been? Dear children, these are very simple things that you can practice in your day-to-day life. I don't ask you to refrain from watching movies, or refrain from eating ice cream, or refrain from eating whatever that you prefer. No, dear children, that is not the Buddha's way. I told you in the beginning, right? Neither Buddha's way is to enjoy the life as much as you can. That is also not the Buddha's way. You can practice this path. You can achieve your salvation even by not watching the movie or watching the movie. Because watching the movie or not watching the movie, or eating the ice cream or not eating the ice cream, is irrelevant to the path that you practice. Dear children, the key is the contemplation. The key is how you interpret this. If you interpret it wrongly, it matters not whether you have it or not have it, whether you watch the movie or not watch the movie. If you interpret in the wrong way, the ignorance is being nourished. That is the pathetic situation, my dear children. Therefore, if you really know what pleasure is, if you can correctly interpret this riddle of pleasure, then, my dear children, you are in the safe side. Now you understand the mechanism of the generation of this pleasure. Therefore, dear children, it matters not whatever that you do, but that does not mean that you should do unmeritorious deeds. No, that will prevent you from realizing this truth. That is why, my dear children, we always ask you to refrain from unmeritorious deeds as much as possible, because it will hinder us from realizing this truth. We should not harm others at any cost. We should not steal. So those are the 10 unmeritorious deeds that we should refrain from, because as you already know, what we give is what we get. If we give a fire to a mine, then obviously we will get a fire. With fire, it is impossible to understand, to realize this truth. Therefore, my dear children, we must always engage in meritorious deeds. These merits that we do will facilitate us to push forward towards the practice of the path. It will lubricate, it will ease our way of the practice. So, powered with the merits, when you contemplate day in and day out, that is the way to your salvation. My dear children, this truth that I am talking about, this truth that I became a monk, is so clear. Is so clear ahead of us. I am ever so grateful towards my teachers, because for them I am experiencing this bliss. My dear children, I really want to share this with you, because this experience, this freedom, the freedom of life is your legacy. This is your Sambuddha Sasana. This is not just belong to the Buddhist all around the world. This is for entire humanity and even beyond. Therefore, dear children, I am trying to share this story with you, and you will be also sharing it in the future if you get the maximum benefit of this. Dear children, therefore I invite you all to understand and comprehend this truth, this philosophy which has been expounded 2,500 years ago, which relieves us all, which is our salvation for everyone on this earth. Therefore, children, try to interpret the pleasure that you seek, that you feel day in and day out, because it matters not that you are afraid of pleasure, because you are afraid of misinterpretation of the pleasures. It might nourish your ignorance, but however much you feel the pleasure, but you cannot get away from it, dear children. So, when you experience the pleasure, when you face pleasures, you can always try this, dear children. When you experience pleasures, you can focus on the vexation aspect. So, if this is pleasurable this much, how vexatious has it been? It's very simple. As well as you can think of how vexatious should it be if you try to forcefully stop it. So you can try that as well, dear children. For example, let's say that you have the urge to eat an ice cream. When you get this urge to eat an ice cream, first you can stop and think, why do I get this urge? But all of a sudden you are thinking in this way, but you have been thinking in a very different line of thought. What you are used to do is to find the ice cream and eat it and enjoy the pleasure. But now you are trying out a very different thing. Now you are trying why these thoughts come to you. What makes it so strong? So while the contemplation happens, now you feel there's a big vexation is building up in the mind. So I want you to focus on that vexation. Because, my dear children, I'm asking you to do that. The very reason that I'm asking you to do that, because this vexation is what the mind relieves from. And that is what responsible for you to feel the pleasure. So this is the true mechanism of the generation of pleasure, my dear children. So you should never get caught of the pleasures that you feel. They do not come from the outside objects, my dear children. What a camouflage. We always tend to misinterpret the pleasure that comes from outside. No, dear children, that is not the case. This is what we should realize. Dear children, when you come across the pleasures in your daily life, you should always contemplate in this line of thought. This will liberate you. This will stop you from thinking that pleasure is there in the outside world. Dear children, if you can improve this practice, I'm sure you will liberate yourself within no time. But don't expect quick results, my dear children, because you have been practicing the wrong interpretation of pleasure for so many eons and eons. That is why we have to undo this, but it won't take eons and eons to undo the practice that we have been doing so far. But it will take at least few years, right? So that is why we shouldn't expect quick results. So it reminds me a story of the Chinese bamboo tree. So some of you may have heard about the Chinese bamboo tree. So when you plant a seed of Chinese bamboo tree, it is said that if you plant the seed and you take care of it, you water it and you clean the area and you take care of it very precautiously, and you clean all the pests and you apply fertilizer and you do everything. But for 5 long years, not even a sapling appears from the seed. But something happens during those 5 years. During those 5 years, a powerful root system is grown, and that doesn't appear from the top. Therefore, during the 5 years that you take care of, the root system develops, and after 5 long years, a sapling occurs from the soil and it grows few feet high within few weeks. So this happened all of a sudden. But if you give up taking care of it in the midway during those 5 years, the result will not manifest. So my dear children, practicing the path is also like that. If you do it consistently, if you do it with the consistency, you will see the power of it. This is called the power of consistency. Not even related to the practice of path. If you do it consistently, anything, you will see for yourself what is the power of consistency. Therefore, my dear children, if you try and inculcate these teachings, this philosophy into your life, if you try and apply those, in your day-to-day life in a consistent way, you will see the power of consistency. Therefore, dear children, so let us apply these concepts and see the world in a different angle, according to the Lord Buddha's way. Therefore, we can interpret the pleasure in its correct way. So, I don't say that you should avoid the things that gives you pleasure. I don't ask you to do that. But when you come across pleasure, when you come across things that might give you pleasure, always try to interpret in the correct way. If it is this pleasurable, how vexatious has it been? I think when you get the hang of it, you will do it with very ease. And with the practice, of course, you will master it. And with practice, you'll become perfect. So that's the art of becoming perfect. So dear children, I think that will bring us to the end of this talk. So we may transfer the merits that we have acquired today to all sentient beings in all worlds. So with the power of the merits that we have acquired throughout the day, if any of them have been born in the woeful planes, may they be redeemed of the woeful planes and be born in the blissful planes. And may they abstain from unmeritorious deeds, fulfill the meritorious deeds, fulfill the noble eightfold path, and attain the supreme bliss of Nibbana. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.